10,000 years. Let that sink in. 10,000 years before Christ, before the pyramids, before Sumer, before anyone invented writing to record anything. At that time, humanity should have been hunting mammoths and sleeping in caves, right? Wrong. In 1952, when Kathleen Kenyon dug her spade into that layer of earth in the Judean desert, she wasn't expecting to rewrite the history of civilization. Jericho had been excavated before. It had already been catalogued. It already had its little file card filled out in archaeology books. But what appeared when she cleared that layer of dust changed everything. Stone. Not loose stone. Cut stone. Stone stacked, forming a wall 3.5 meters high. And beside that wall, a tower, 9 meters rising toward the sky. 9 meters of rough stone, fitted with precision, built by people who had no metal to cut with, no wheel to transport, with not even writing to leave an instruction manual. And look, when the dating tests started coming back, Kenyon must have thought she'd made some mistake, because the numbers didn't make sense. 8,000 years before Christ, 9,000, 10,000. She redid the tests, called other laboratories, checked the stratigraphy 3, 4 times, and the numbers kept screaming the same impossible thing. Jericho was too old to have a wall, too old to have planned architecture, too old to exist as a city, because you see, the chronology of civilization that we learn in school has an order. Agriculture comes first, then villages, then towns, and only then, much later, cities with complex structure. There are stages. There's gradual evolution. There's logic. Jericho said, screw logic. Because it wasn't just the age that bothered people. It was the sophistication. To build a wall like that, you need hundreds of people working together. Someone needs to plan. Someone needs to command. You need to feed these people while they work instead of hunt. You need social hierarchy, organization, centralized power, things that theoretically only appear thousands of years later. Kenyon kept digging, and she found houses, not huts made of branches and mud, real houses, with brick walls, with separate rooms, with leveled floors. Some even had plaster on the interior walls. Plaster. 10,000 years ago, someone took the trouble to smooth the walls of their own house. This isn't brutal survival. This is comfort. This is aesthetics. Inside the tower, she found a staircase. 22 stone steps climbing in a spiral, each step cut, fitted, thought out. Someone knew enough geometry to make that thing not collapse. And here comes the question nobody can answer. Properly. What for? Defense, everyone says right away. Walls are for defense, obviously, but wait, defense against whom? At that time, the human population was minuscule. Nomadic groups scattered across the desert, living by hunting and gathering. There were no armies, no organized warfare, no hordes of invaders marching across the horizon. So why the hell would you invest years of collective labor to raise a stone barrier? There are theories. There always are. Some say it was for flood control. Others talk about prestige, demonstration of power. Some say it was ritual, some religious significance we don't understand anymore. But the truth? The truth is, nobody knows. And the more you think about it, the stranger it gets. Kenyon dug deeper, and Jericho kept going down. Layer after layer of occupation. 10,000 years of people living there, rebuilding, expanding, burying their dead, under the floors of their own houses. And then she found something that gives me chills to this day. Skulls. Human skulls separated from the bodies. But not just tossed there, no. Carefully preserved, with plaster molded over them, recreating the features of the person who had died. With shells fitted in place of the eyes, someone spent hours, maybe days, looking at that dead face and sculpting each detail back. The shape of the nose, the line of the jaw, The curve of the cheeks, think about that. 10,000 years before Christ, someone loved another person so much they couldn't let that face disappear. There was no photography, no portrait, just their own hands, clay, and memory. And so the person sat down and reconstructed. With precision, with care. That's not primitive. That's profoundly, painfully human. And you know what that means? It means everything we thought about the timeline of civilization is wrong, or at least incomplete, because Jericho shouldn't be there, not like that. Not at that time. It ruins the pretty graph we drew showing how humanity evolved step by step. Kenyon died in 1978. She spent decades trying to understand Jericho, and in the end, I think she died with more questions than answers. Because the deeper you go, the more layers appear. More mysteries, more things that don't fit. And look, there's something else that bothers me. Jericho didn't appear out of nowhere. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to build a walled city. Someone planned that. Someone convinced hundreds of people to stop wandering through the desert and stay. To raise stones that weighed tons, to dig foundations, to think about future generations. Why? What did they see? What did they know? And why did we forget? Jericho sits in a place that shouldn't work. It's desert, heat that cracks your skin, dust that gets in your lungs and stays. But there's one thing there that changes everything. A spring. Water bursting from the ground in the middle of nowhere. And look, water in the desert isn't just convenient. It's magic. It's the difference between life and death. When you look at the map, Jericho is tucked into the Jordan Valley, 250 meters below sea level. It's one of the lowest points on Earth. The heat down there is suffocating, but the spring compensates. It gushes fresh water, constant, generous, and around that water life explodes. Vegetation, animals, food. Within a radius of kilometers around, there's only sand and death. But there it's a real oasis, and that's what attracted the first humans. We don't know their names, we don't know their stories, but we know they arrived there around 10,000 BC and thought, we can stay here. We don't need to keep walking after food. The food comes to us. And then they did something revolutionary, something most humans of that era didn't even consider. They stopped. They stopped wandering, stopped following herds, built permanent shelters, and more importantly, they started cultivating. Wild wheat grew nearby, barley too. They took the seeds, planted them, waited, and it worked. For the first time in the history of that region, humans didn't depend only on the luck of the hunt. They produced food, but here comes the kicker. Agriculture requires commitment. You plant, you stay. You need to take care of those fragile little plants, water them, protect them from animals, wait months until harvest. And during those months, you're vulnerable. You can't just run away if something goes wrong. You've invested time, energy, hope. So they did something even more radical. They built the wall. And look, this is going to get even stranger, because when we think of a wall, we think of war, right? Of enemies outside trying to invade. But at that time, who would these enemies be? Nomadic groups don't attack cities. They don't have the structure for that, don't have the numbers, don't have military organization. So what the hell motivated those people to spend years stacking stone? Some archaeologists say it was flood control. The spring could overflow, flood everything. Makes sense, but wait, 3.5 meters high for flood control, and the 9-meter tower, that's not just functional. That's a demonstration of power. That's someone saying, look what we can do. I personally think there's something deeper going on, because building something like that isn't just practical, it's symbolic, it's psychological. When you raise a wall around your city, you're saying, inside here is different, inside here is ours, out there is chaos, in here is civilization. You're creating identity, belonging. And you, what do you think? Do you think they built that out of real fear of invaders? Or was it something else? Leave in the comments what makes more sense to you, military defense or social control. Well, while you think about that, help me with something. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I am, hit that like button down there. Seriously, it helps the video reach more people who dig these strange things from ancient history. And subscribe to the channel too, because there's a lot more archaeological mystery coming. All right? Thanks a lot. Now come back with me to Jericho, because there's a detail I haven't told you yet. That tower, the 9-meter one, it wasn't on the edge of the wall like you'd expect. It was on the inside the city. And it had an internal staircase going up to the top. What's a tower on the inside of the wall for? If it's for defense, it should be on the edge, giving a view of what's coming from outside. But no, it's facing inward, toward the city, as if it were made for the people of Jericho to look at it, as if it were a monument, a landmark, a constant reminder that they were capable of building the impossible. And there's more. The tower was built before several of the houses around it. In other words, they prioritized raising that stone monster before improving their own dwellings. That's not survival logic. That's something else. Prestige, maybe. Collective identity. Or perhaps something religious that we can't even imagine. Kenyon found evidence that Jericho had between 400 and 900 inhabitants at that time. Seems like a little? It wasn't. For that era, it was gigantic. Most human groups didn't exceed 50, 60 people. But in Jericho, hundreds lived together, shared space, resources, decisions. And that creates problems. When you have 10 people, everyone knows each other. Everyone has a voice. But when you have 500, you need structure. Someone needs to decide who does what, who gets which piece of land, who commands the construction. You need hierarchy. And that's where things get really strange, because they didn't find clear evidence of leadership in Jericho. No palace, no king's tomb, nothing that screams, the chief lived here. The houses are relatively similar. Nobody seems to have lived in absurd luxury while others starved. So how the hell did they coordinate the construction of the wall? How did they decide on the tower's design? How did they organize hundreds of people without an obvious leader? Could it have been some kind of council, collective decision? Or was there an invisible power that we can't detect in the rubble, can't know for sure? But what we can know is that it worked. Jericho didn't last decades. It lasted millennia. 10,000 years of continuous occupation. Generations and generations being born, living and dying inside those walls. Rebuilding when it collapsed. Expanding when the population grew, burying the dead under the floor of their own houses. And that's where the part that gives me goosebumps comes in. They buried the dead under the house, literally. You died, and your family dug a hole in the living room floor and put you there, covered you with earth, leveled it again, and life went on. Every day people walked over the bones of grandparents, parents, children who didn't survive. To us, that seems macabre, but to them, it was intimacy. It was keeping the dead close, not forgetting, not abandoning. It was saying, you're still part of this house. We still walk on the same ground as you. But there's a detail. Not everyone was buried the same way. In some cases, after a while, they came back, unearthed the body, took only the skull, separated it from the skeleton, and then began a ritual we're still trying to understand. They cleaned the skull, removed all the flesh, all residue, and then, with absurd delicacy, they started reconstructing the face. Plaster, clay, marine shells for where the eyes used to be. They molded the cheeks back, the nose, the jawline, every anatomical detail recreated with precision. Kenyon found 10 of these skulls, 10 reconstructed faces, and when you look at photos of them, man, it does something strange to your chest, because they're not generic masks. Each one is different. Each one has unique features. You can see that was a person, someone specific. Someone who was loved enough that someone else spent days sculpting the memory of that face back into existence. Why did they do this? Ancestor cult, the experts say. Maybe these skulls were of leaders, or shamans, or important figures who needed to be remembered. But look, that's speculation. The truth is, we don't know. We don't know if it was religious, political, or just love, longing, the refusal to let someone disappear completely. And there's another layer to this. The shells used in the eyes weren't local. They came from the Mediterranean, miles away. Someone traveled or traded, got those shells specifically to use on the dead. This isn't improvisation. This is planning. Symbolic value. Those shells meant something. I keep thinking about who these people were. Who was the artisan holding the skull of someone they maybe knew in life? Did they remember the way the person smiled, the tone of voice? And then, while molding the plaster, are they trying to bring back not just the face, but the essence, the presence? I confess this part bothers me. In the good way, you know. It bothers me because it breaks that idea that ancient peoples were brutish, primitive, people who only thought about surviving. But no, they thought about death, about what comes after, about how to preserve those who left. They felt. And you, what do you think of this? Would you do that? Would you keep the skull of someone you love and reconstruct the face? Or does that seem too disturbing to you? Tell me in the comments, because I really want to know how you feel about this. But going back, Jericho wasn't just ritual and death, it was life too, life organized in a surprising way. The houses had structure. They weren't just four walls and a roof. They had separate rooms, area for sleeping, area for cooking. Some had interior courtyards, small but functional. And look at this detail. The floor was leveled, smoothed. Some houses even had a kind of plaster on the interior walls, plaster mixed with lime. They literally painted the walls 10,000 years ago. While most of humanity slept in caves or temporary shelters, the people of Jericho were worried about decoration. This speaks to a different mentality. It's not just I need a roof. It's I'm going to live here for the rest of my life, so it should be comfortable. It's emotional investment in the place. It's building home, not shelter. And there was craftsmanship. They found extremely well-worked flint tools, sharp blades, scrapers, arrowheads with almost perfect symmetry. This requires skill, time, practice. Someone there was an expert and probably taught others. Past knowledge. Forward. There were also figurines, small clay figures, some representing humans, others animals. What were they for? Decoration, ritual, children's toys? We don't know. But we know someone sat down, took clay and created. For pleasure, for spiritual need. For some reason that went beyond brutal survival. And then the foods. Jericho had variety. Wheat, barley, lentils, chickpeas. They hunted gazelles, foxes, hares, caught birds, and, curiously, they had goats, not fully domesticated yet, but in process. Young goats were kept nearby, fed, controlled. This is the beginning of animal husbandry. It's not just gathering what nature offers, it's manipulating, controlling, creating systems, and that changes everything. Because when you have a herd, even a small one, you have reserves, security. You don't depend 100% on the harvest or the luck of the hunt. But with all this sophistication, one thing is still missing. The thing we always think comes along with civilization. Writing. There wasn't any. Nothing. Not even complex symbols. No markings suggesting some kind of proto-writing. Nothing. How did they coordinate everything? How did they plan constructions? How did they pass technical knowledge from generation to generation? All oral, all in memory, all in observation and practice. And it worked. For millennia. The theories about the wall and tower keep multiplying. Some more recent researchers brought up a crazy idea: astronomy. They measured the alignment of the tower. And apparently on the summer solstice, the sunset was perfectly aligned with its top viewed from a specific point in the city. Coincidence? Maybe. But maybe not. Maybe that tower was a calendar, a time marker, essential for agriculture, for knowing when to plant, when to harvest. And if that's it, damn, that raises their level of sophistication even more. But there's also the darker theory. The darker theory says the wall wasn't to keep things out. It was to keep things in. Think with me. You have 500, 600 people living in a small space. Too close, no privacy, no space to breathe. And all around the desert, free, open, empty. It would be tempting, wouldn't it? Just grab your things and take off. Go back to nomadic life. Hunt, wander. No rules, no hierarchy. No having to wake up every day and work the same land in the same place. But if you leave, the city weakens, loses manpower, loses knowledge. And if too many people leave, the city collapses. So maybe the wall was psychological, a physical reminder that you can't just leave. You're inside, you're part of this. And leaving means abandoning everything, everyone. There's no direct evidence of this, of course, but it makes sense, doesn't it? Social control through architecture. The wall as a symbol of forced belonging, of irreversible commitment. Or maybe I'm overthinking it. The theories diverge here, and they always will, because we don't have their voices. We don't have the fears, the motivations, the debates that happened before they raised the first stone. We only have the stones, and what we decide they mean. What's certain is that Jericho didn't stand still in time. It changed, evolved. Around 8000 BC, something happened. The city was abandoned. We don't know why. Drought, maybe. The spring may have weakened, or internal conflict, epidemic, something. The people disappeared, and Jericho became ruins, but not for long. A few hundred years later, another wave of people arrived, different, with different culture. They didn't build the same way. Their houses were rectangular, not round like the previous ones. Their dead weren't buried at home. They were placed in cemeteries outside the city. They didn't make reconstructed skulls, didn't continue that ritual so specific, so intimate. It was another people, another worldview. But they chose the same place, the same spring, as if Jericho called people back generation after generation. And this continued. For millennia, layers and layers of occupation, each one building over the ruins of the previous one, each one leaving their dead, their tools, their marks. Jericho became a tell, those artificial mounds made of stacked cities. Each meter of depth is a century, each layer a whole lifetime of people who left no names. Kenyon excavated 17 meters deep, 17 meters of compacted human history, and still didn't reach the bottom. There's still more. There's always more. But here comes something that makes me uneasy. Jericho wasn't the only one. After they found it, archaeologists started looking in other places. And they found them. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Çatalhöyük, Ayin Ghazal. Places that shouldn't exist at that time. Places that also had complex architecture, elaborate rituals, social organization before what we thought possible. This raises a giant question. What if we're looking at human history the wrong way? What if civilization didn't suddenly appear in Mesopotamia and Egypt? What if it was already trying to exist thousands of years earlier in places like Jericho, but we're only now noticing? Because look, the history they taught us is linear. Hunter-gatherers, then agriculture, then villages, then towns, then cities, then writing, then civilization. Clean, organized, logical. But Jericho doesn't fit. Göbekli Tepe doesn't fit. These places break. The line. Could human evolution have been more chaotic than we think, more experimental? Maybe civilization arose and collapsed several times. Attempts, failures, restarts. And Jericho is just one of the attempts that lasted long enough to leave a trace? I personally think so. I think we underestimate how capable our ancestors were. We look at the absence of writing and think primitive. But no, they built 9-meter towers, created agricultural systems, organized hundreds of people, developed complex rituals of death and memory, made art, had aesthetics, had soul. And you? Do you think Jericho was an exception or the tip of the iceberg? How many other cities like it existed and turned to dust before anyone could excavate? Tell me in the comments. Seriously, what's your theory about this? Because the more I read about Jericho, the more I realize we know nothing. We have fragments, pieces, and we try to assemble a puzzle without having the picture on the box. We invent the picture, and each archaeologist invents a different one. Some people see Jericho and see early militarization, war, fear. Some see resource control, political power. Some see religion, ancestor worship, worship of forces we can't even imagine. And some just see people trying to survive, trying to build something that would last longer than themselves. They're all right, and they're all wrong, because Jericho wasn't just one thing. It was all of that. It was contradiction. It was complexity. It was human. And maybe the most fascinating thing is exactly that. Not what we discovered about Jericho, but what Jericho discovered about us, about what it means to be human, about this strange need we have to build, to remember, to leave a mark, to say, I was here. 10,000 years later, we're still looking at the stones they stacked, still trying to understand, still asking why. And in a way, they succeeded. They got what they wanted, immortality, not for individuals, but for the city, for the place, for the idea. Jericho still exists, not as it was, but as an echo, as a question that won't leave your head. There's something I can't get out of my head. Imagine you living in Jericho in 9000 BC. You wake up, leave your brick house, look around and see the wall, that enormous stone wall your grandparents helped build. You walk to the spring, get water, pass by the tower, 9 meters of stone rising toward the sky. You know that out there in the desert, there are people living differently. Nomadic groups, no fixed home, no wall, no tower. And somehow, you know your life is strange, that what you've built there is unique. But you don't know. It's the first city. You don't know that 10,000 years from now, someone will dig up your walls and be speechless. You just know it's your home, and that you need to protect it. Did they have pride? When they looked at the tower, did they think, we made this? Or was it just part of the landscape, as common as the spring? We'll never know. And there's a sad beauty in that. All those lives, all those names, all the conversations, the laughter, the fears, the fights, the loves, everything vanished. Only stone remained, and we look at stone and try to imagine the rest. Kenyon spent 15 years excavating Jericho. 15 years of her life dedicated to understanding a place that no longer existed. She died in 1978, and to this day, archaeologists keep going back there. Keep digging, keep finding new things. Each excavation raises more questions. For example, they recently discovered that Jericho Spring is 23,000 years old. 23,000. That means it was already there long before the city. Did earlier groups pass through there? Camp? Dream of staying but couldn't? How many failed attempts existed before the one that finally worked? And there's another thing, DNA. They managed to extract DNA from some of the remains found, and they discovered that the original people of Jericho had genetic connection with populations from the north, from Anatolia, from Turkey. They came from far away, crossed desert, found the spring, and decided that was the place. Why? What were they fleeing from or searching for? Was it just the water? Or was there something more, something spiritual? Some calling that we don't understand anymore. The answers don't come, only more questions. And maybe that's how it is. Maybe ancient history is this. A dialogue with ghosts who never answer back. We shout questions to the past, and only the echo returns. But look, there's value in that. There's value in remembering that before everything we know, there were already people trying. There were already people building. There were already people loving. There were already people sculpting the face of someone who died because they couldn't accept total disappearance. That moves me. Really. Because it means we've always been like this strange thing we do, this refusal to accept the void, this need to build, to remember, to leave something behind. That's not modern. That's been human from the beginning. Jericho proves it. 10,000 years ago, without technology, without writing, without anything we think is essential today, they did something extraordinary. They created community, created identity, created memory. And I keep thinking, 10,000 years from now, what will they find from us? What will remain of our cities, our towers, our faces? Will someone dig up the remains of our civilization and be as confused as we are with Jericho? Will they look at our destroyed skyscrapers and ask, why did they build so high? Probably yes, because time erases context, erases reason, only leaves structure. And structure without context is mystery. But going back, Jericho taught me something. It taught me that we don't invent anything, we just repeat. They had the same questions we do: how to live together, how to organize ourselves, how to remember the dead, how to build something that lasts. 10,000 years separate us from them, but the questions are the same. And the answers are similar too. We build, we create rituals, we make art, we try to control chaos, we fail, we try again. So tell me, something? After hearing all this about Jericho, what impresses you most? The wall, the tower, the reconstructed skulls? Or is it something else? Is it the fact that they did all this without having an example, without having a manual, without knowing if it would work? Leave in the comments which part of this story hit you hardest and why, because I really want to know how this resonates with you. What image stays in your head when you think of Jericho? For me, it's that artisan, the one holding the skull, the one who wet their hands in plaster and started sculpting. They didn't know they were creating archaeology. They didn't know they were leaving evidence of love 10,000 years in the future. They just knew they couldn't let that face disappear. And they succeeded. The face is still here. We still look. We still feel. That's immortality, isn't it? Not immortality of the body. Not of the name, but of intention, of gesture, of care. That crosses time, crosses language, crosses everything. Jericho isn't just the first city. Jericho is proof that we've always been people, always felt, always tried, always built things bigger than ourselves, hoping that someone, someday, would look and understand, and we understand. 10,000 years later, we look at the stones, look at the skulls, and we understand. So if you made it this far, thanks a lot for listening. Thanks for caring about a city that disappeared before writing existed. Thanks for paying attention to these desert ghosts. And if you liked it, share this video. Send it to someone who likes history, mystery, archaeology, or just to someone who likes thinking about strange things. We need more people thinking about strange things. And comment down there, seriously, what's your theory about Jericho? What detail marked you? Or if you already knew this story, what do you think still needs to be discovered? What's still buried there waiting for someone to dig? Jericho still has secrets. I'm sure of it. And who knows? In a few years, someone finds something that changes everything again. That answers the questions or raises 1,000 new ones. Until then, we stay here, looking at the past, trying to understand, trying to remember that before everything, there were always people like us, trying to make sense of the world, trying to leave a mark, and they succeeded forever.